Mr. Speaker, whereas the government of Barbados has determined that there should be a modernized strategic approach to physical development planning in Barbados, with a view to making the planning process more transparent and efficient through the development of a green paper on planning law reform. And whereas it is recognized that a modern, fit-for-purpose town planning system and the requisite land use policy are vital cogs in any system established to transform the socioeconomic landscape of Barbados. And whereas it is accepted that land use planning is an integral part of the process of national growth and development, and that economic decisions to focus on tourism, the manufacturing industry, agricultural development as the basis for Barbados's economic development must be translated into land use terms. And whereas the strategic approach informs the thrust of the government as it seeks to develop new planning legislation which epitomizes good governance, efficiency, transparency and consistency, and which supports high-quality, sustainable development for current and future generations. And whereas this new approach calls for the orderly and progressive development of lands, taking cognizance of the need for effective regulation of land development, planning obligations, enforcement of decisions, and the right of appeal. And whereas the strategic approach has at its core the improvement in the quality and speed of the delivery of services in Barbados, in particular, town and country planning permissions to promote doing business with ease. And whereas the Green Paper on Planning Law Reform in Barbados has as its 5 goals transparency and accountability, openness and inclusiveness, efficiency and effectiveness, sustainable development, and being fit for purpose. And whereas this Green Paper on Planning Law Reform in Barbados, with its clear articulation of policy direction, prescribes the role of the Minister, the Chief Town Planner, the applicants, the private sector, and the general public in the holistic and all-embracing development of a modernized legislative framework and planning system. And whereas the Cabinet on September 18, 2018 approved the Green Paper on Planning Law Reform in Barbados and agreed that should be laid in Parliament. Be it resolved that Parliament take note of the Green Paper on Planning Law Reform in Barbados. So, Mr. Speaker, with reference to the aforeread resolution, I wish this morning to stand to support and present to this Honourable Chamber the draft Green Paper on Planning Law Reform, which seeks to outline and seeks to engage the people of Barbados in a very needed conversation. And Mr. Speaker, I want to frame this conversation as one that is not so much technical as it is fundamental. I want to frame this conversation as being about a matter that perhaps over the last decade led, or perhaps not led, as we were. It is a concept and an idea, and this Planning Law Reform Green Paper is based on something that perhaps in Barbados we have lost a bit of our grip on over the last decade. It is something that we have had perhaps a tradition of since independence, but something that we have not sufficiently seen. But it is something that is fundamental, and it is the simple matter, Mr. Speaker, of growth. And when I talk about growth, I'm talking about growth of a particular kind. I'm talking about a growth that is led by transformation, a growth that is inclusive and led by people. And, Mr. Speaker, one of the reasons that I'm pleased that we have this morning as a House taken note of the Barbados Economic Recovery and Transformation Plan is that these words, economic recovery and transformation, are important. They're not by accident. The plan is so named because of the way that this Barbados Labour Party government has had to frame our work on behalf of the people of Barbados who gave us the overwhelming mandate and placed in us the overwhelming trust that they did on May 24th. The plan, sir, speaks to economic recovery, but, sir, beyond that, it speaks to transformation. And I want us to understand that in coming to government and in coming to leadership, this Barbados Labour Party government had to identify some mission-critical activities in which to engage. We had to seek, sir, before we could do any further surgery on the patient, we had to stop the bleeding and stabilize the patient. And so we had to stop the hemorrhaging of foreign reserves. We had and continue to have to address the debt issue. We have had to address some of the critical economic challenges that this country has been left to deal with. And so we've had to give some attention in the phase 1 of the BERT plan to the kinds of measures that will mean that this country of ours that we love can have a possibility of a future. But, Mr. Speaker, sir, the BERT plan also speaks to transformation. And I dare say that anyone that were to read the Barbados Labour Party manifesto would see that while we do discuss in detail the mission-critical interventions that were needed, the large part of the document speaks to transformation. It speaks to what are the things that will drive growth, what are the sectors in which we expect growth to be driven, what are the kinds and levels of investment that are required to drive this growth. And really, Mr. Speaker, it speaks to a re-engineering, a reimagining of Barbados. And so while the BERT plan is a reasonably short document, because we came to government having, sir, to immediately address issues that were left at the feet of the people of Barbados. And so we had very quickly to act, something that the last administration has only a passing acquaintance with doing. We had to act. But it does not mean, sir, that we had not and do not continue to spend the time before the last general election and since thinking and consulting and coming up, sir, with the ways in which we can engage and must engage all Barbadians in the future development of this country. And so, beyond the recovery issues that we have spoken to so much in this honourable chamber over the last few weeks, the BERT also speaks to very important growth issues. It speaks to the ways in which we will lay the foundation for making sure that we have sustainable growth in this country. And I have to say sustainable, sir, because You know, I want us to understand that the one-off sale of assets, as proposed on so many occasions under the last administration, is not growth. It may be a short stop or a band-aid for shoring up the reserves. But sir, indeed, almost every measure, if it could be so called, that was suggested by the last administration was really not about addressing any structural issues that this country has to grapple with. But sir, the Burt plan, against which backdrop we are discussing this draft green paper on planning law reform, does begin to outline those strategies. And I want to say that this 27-page document is not meant to contain the meaning of life, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is not meant to contain and to detail every single strategy in which this government will engage and will seek to engage the people of Barbados. For that, we have other instruments. For that, we will develop other more detailed plans. But it does give the framework for the growth reforms that we anticipate. So one of the critical factors, sir, in the unsustainable debt problem that this country had thrust upon it by the last administration, was that for a decade there was really no growth in this country. And in fact, in the 6 months up to June 2018, the first part of this year, the economy contracted a further 0.6%. And that put it, sir, at levels that were barely above where we reached in 2007. So we have an economy, sir, that is essentially the same size as it was over a decade ago. Nothing was happening. And so we as a government are placing and have started to place very early emphasis on economic recovery, yes, but also on the shift to a higher growth rate in this country. And so in the Burt plan, the growth strategy rests on 5 pillars. The first is investing in and deepening existing investments in skills training and in education. A second is better mobilizing private domestic savings for local investment. A third is making government an enabler of growth. And this third and perhaps fourth pillars are what bring us to this conversation today. Making government an enabler of growth. A fourth is supporting the mainstays of the current economy as being tourism and international business. And a fifth pillar is promoting a new, high-skilled, knowledge-based, technology-empowered, diversified economy, one that encompasses renewable energy, creative and artistic industries, education and health services, high-tech agro-industries, and research. So, sir, that is the backdrop against which I wish to discuss this draft green paper. Because this is not a technical exercise to make amendments to existing legislation. It is necessary, sir, because the current Town and Country Planning Act that was enacted in 1965 was based on UK legislation that was devised, like so many things that we currently have operating and that we need to step back from and consider whether they serve us today. But the current act was really devised for a different era, a different time, a different place. And so that nearly 52 years after our independence, sir, it is fitting that we go back to first principles and that we revisit the issue of physical development and planning law and come up with legislation that is relevant to the 21st century in Barbados. And this legislation is relevant, is necessary, is critical, sir, because it is really fundamental to being able to drive the kind of investment that we want to see. It is critical to improving the ease of doing business in this country. And it is the kind of step that will signal to the world that Barbados is open for business again, and beyond being open for business again, that we are serious about stepping into the third decade of the 21st century. Mr. Speaker, in the 2018 Doing Business report, the World Bank ranked Barbados 132nd out of 190 countries with respect to the overall ease of doing business. And this new ranking, sir, meant that we had now slipped 15 places below our previous position. And sir, Barbadians within the sound of my voice will perhaps have gotten used to this notion of having slipped in international estimation of our neighbors. Because, regrettably, this is where we have found ourselves over and over again over the last decade. And you know, one of the things that is perhaps most upsetting to me, has been most upsetting to me, having taken stock of where we have come and how we have come to be here, is the real danger and the real fear that mediocrity take hold in this country. That is the fear. That we may have gotten so used under the last administration to non-performance, to underachievement, to being underwhelming as a country, that somehow it is what we come to expect. But this Barbados Labour Party administration is here, sir, to help, and I say help, because it is not just us in here that can do it. But we are here certainly to help return Barbados to its tradition of excellence. And that is a part of what we are discussing here today. So one of the major factors, sir, that can explain why we have come so far down in the doing business rankings, in the competitiveness index, and other similar international measures, has to do with simply how easy it is to get things done in this country. How long does it take, for example, to deal with a construction permit? Barbados is 155th of 190 countries with respect to dealing with construction permits. It takes an average, this is as of the 2018 report, it takes an average of 442 days, 14 and a half months to be approved. The average time is 192 days for countries in Latin America and the Caribbean. Sir, I repeat that because it is only when we start to get specific about what is plaguing us that we can address and correct it. With respect to dealing with construction permits, it takes an average of 442 days, 14.5 months in Barbados to be approved, compared to the 6.3-month regional average in Latin America and the Caribbean. And, sir, this average delay exceeds the 2-month limitation period that we had determined for applications for planning permission to be responded to under the current Act. So we are failing ourselves. We are failing our own targets that we have set. And sir, this green paper on planning law reform seeks, among other things, to address these failures. Because it is only by doing so that we will create the growth and investment environment that is needed to take this country forward. And I will not, in this debate today, seek to get into all of the sectors in which we will expect growth to take place. I will not seek to get to specifics of what percentage average for the medium term going forward we would expect to get to. I will not get into these matters today because I want to do justice to this piece of work. I want to take us through not just what is being placed before us for consideration, but also to make reference to the fact that as a green paper, this document has been placed in the public domain. For Barbadians, sir, to interact with the content, for Barbadians to understand what it is we are trying to achieve, and to have a say in how the government of Barbados does its business. So, in response to this fall in the Doing Business Index, the Competitiveness Index, and other international indices, in our 2018 manifesto, this Barbados Labour Party government committed to improving the quality and speed of delivery of services, including town and country planning permissions that will promote doing business with ease in Barbados. And beyond that, in our manifesto, sir, we undertook to modernize our approach to physical development planning by making the development control process transparent and accountable. And how would we do that? By providing, amongst other things, for public comment on development proposals, by providing for public participation in decision-making, and for the publication of decisions and the reasons for approval or refusal of applications. Sir, regrettably again, one of the casualties of the last administration was the public trust. People started to develop the notion that its government was making deals and making decisions to which it was not privy. And that's one of the reasons, sir, that this green paper does not stand alone in the types of actions that we are about to take with respect to transparency and accountability. I have stood in this very place, sir, and spoken to the electronic dashboard that we hope and that we will implement, which is really a way for not just us who work on behalf of the people of Barbados, but a way for the people of Barbados to be able to look and see, not just for public sector investment projects, but also for projects that may have a private component, to see what is their stage of implementation, what may be any bottlenecks that are delaying their progress, and what is some of the basic expenditure information that is associated with the project. And this relates, sir, to projects that the people of Barbados would have a strong interest in, projects that are transformational in nature, projects that stand to really change and improve fundamentally and substantially the well-being and the welfare of the people of this country. So that, sir, we no longer want to have a culture and an environment in which people hear about what government is doing on the streets, in the alleys, in the corners. This Barbados Labour Party government is cultivating a spirit of real democracy, because democracy is not just about going to the polls every 5 years. Democracy is about participation in the decision-making of the government that you have elected. And so this green paper, sir, is just one of the many ways in which we have demonstrated that commitment to transparency and accountability. The integrity bill is another. That too has been and continues to be in the public domain. The discussion about making government fit for purpose and making sure that people have a say in how it wants its government to be shaped and to be constituted to do its business. That has been in the public domain through the online survey to which so many people responded. And so this is not, sir, just a fly-by-night approach, but this is one that will continue to characterize this Barbados Labour Party government. And so, in order to engage the people of this country in the development of this new legislation, the Office of the Prime Minister and the Barbados Town Planning Society in July organized 2 stakeholder consultations on the reform of the planning system. And these were held on the 16th and the 25th of July. And further, there were live streamed for interactive public participation, so that those who were not able to physically be there could also participate and could listen to the views and reflect on what was being discussed. The issues that were raised, sir, in those consultations and the recommendations that came from those consultations have been taken into account in the writing of the paper before us today. And so already we are hearing and we are listening to and we are reflecting back to the people of Barbados their own assessment and understanding of what they want to see. Sir, the question of town planning applications and decisions and physical development planning is one that many Barbadians, most Barbadians I would say, know all too well. And I stopped to make this point because I don't want to give the impression that what we are concerned with here today is simply making it easier for people to come in and invest. We want people to come in and invest. We need to make it easier for them. But we also need to make it easier for Barbadians to invest in their own country. And sir, the kind of growth that is going to sustain us is the kind of growth that is led by Barbadians. And that is why we have said, as a government, that we are willing to trust people. You know, a former colleague of all of ours once said something that I will never forget. He said, as we were developing the manifesto, and he is in this chamber, I may remember, he said, if we are asking the people of Barbados to trust us, we have to trust the people. That is something that I now find ironic, but I still find worthy of taking forward. And that is why, sir, we developed the trust loans. Because we realize that not everyone is in a position to be able to access highly collateralized loans. Not everyone can go before a bank, especially in the current climate, the climate that was created under the last administration, and have access to the kind of capital that is required, even for just small businesses. Even for a welder who wants to buy new equipment, a hairdresser who wants to buy some new dryers. Even for sole proprietor kinds of operations. It is very difficult to access just small amounts of capital, and that's why we said that under the Trust Loan Program, regular Barbadians who have found it difficult to get their businesses going will be eligible for up to $5,000 to be able to invest in their small business. And it is a trust exercise, because we are saying that not that there will not be basic stipulations, but that we want you to know that the government of Barbados is willing to invest in you. And so this green paper, sir, is not just about driving large investment, which we must do, and which, thankfully, you know, the Honourable Prime Minister always says, has a saying, that it's better to be born lucky than to be born rich. And somehow, And I think it may have had something to do with the results of May 24th. And I think it may have had something to do with the fact that people now believe in the leadership of Barbados again. But somehow, we are now attracting again the level of investment interest that is going to mean that this kind of legislation reform is important. People still believe in Barbados. People are still willing to invest in Barbados. And so we want them to come, but we also want to create the environment for domestic investors. Because a former Barbados Labour Party or an older Barbados Labour Party used to say, and what drove the Labour Party then was that Barbadians needed to have a piece of the rock. But going forward, what we're also saying is that Barbadians need to have not just a piece of the rock, but a piece of the action. Because wealth is not just about the tangible anymore. And wealth is not cash. And so we have to create and start to foster the entrepreneurial spirit and the spirit of investment and believing in yourself that you can create your own capacity to generate income based on the talent that you have, based on the education that we nurture in this country that is our tradition. But sir, not just foreign investment, not just domestic investment in business, but sir, Barbadians need to feel that not everything that they have to get up and leave home to go and do, and perhaps not even leave home, but not every transaction in which they engage must be a nuisance. We have regrettably, over the last decade, developed an over-bureaucratized reality in this country. And I know what is behind it. Because I know that the longer you delay someone, the longer you frustrate them, the more likely they are to perhaps just go in their pocket and find some persuasion for you to get things moving. Delay is the partner of corruption, sir. And we have seen that played out over the last 10 years. But Barbadians now feel that they don't even want to go and engage with any provider, including in government, and perhaps especially in government. Because there has taken hold over the last decade the sense that government is not here to help you do your business, but government is here to find a way to tell you no. And that cannot be the purpose of government. Government is meant to be a facilitator of business, an enabler of growth, an enabler of people to self-actualize and to find their way to live the kind of life in which they will find value. That is why we are here. And so, a part of the task of this Barbados Labour Party government, along with all the other things that we need to fix and that we are continuing to have to fix. And the Honourable Member for Christchurch East Central knows this well, because 80% of his commitment every day is cleaning up messes that have been made in the Ministry of Finance where he sits. And that's not the only place that messes have been made. But we are committed to the fix, sir, because we are committed to this country and to the people of Barbados. And so, town planning decisions and applications have represented perhaps one of the major frustrations for business people, but also for regular people who are trying to do a small repair to their house, or just trying to add some facility to make their children's lives improve their children's lives in some way. We want not just to encourage investment, but we want to remove nuisances from the lives of people. And that is one of the reasons that we have undertaken this work. And so the governance model that the government of Barbados has established for approaching this reform is really one that we apply with everything that we do, and it is really about first principles. It's really about asking the following questions. What is the public interest that the government must seek to protect? What do we have to protect the public from? We have a responsibility to make sure that all our citizens are treated fairly and that we do not perpetuate a system in which people are brought to harm. So what is the public interest that the government must seek to protect? What is the public mischief against which the government must guard? How does the use of technology potentially help the government achieve its goals? What are the social justice issues that the government needs to take into account? And what are the structures and the processes that government can put in place to get the views of Barbadians and to include them in decision making? So, what is the public interest that we have to protect? What is it that the public must gain or must stand to gain? What is the public mischief against which we are protecting? What are the social justice issues that we need to bear in mind always? How can we use technology to do what we need to do? And what are the structures and the processes that government must put in place to make sure that people participate, are allowed to participate in effective decision making? So those are the 5 governance questions that we have used in approaching this, and that we will continue to use in advancing a lot of the work that we must do in order to address some of the structural factors that have been inhibiting growth in this country. You know, we have said in our manifesto that the government must be able to move beyond tax and spend powers in carrying out its duty to the people of Barbados. The government has other powers, including regulation, including facilitation, including legislation. And these are the things that are going to be able to address some of the structural issues, some of the things that are now endemic to the way that Barbados as a small island is structured, that are now perhaps entrenched in the way that we operate as a small economy, that have made us believe that we cannot do any different. But we are unpacking, sir, everything that we have taken to be true, everything that we believe about ourselves, and we are going back to basics to create a Barbados that is fit and that the people of Barbados deserve. And so the review process and the proposed changes are measured against and done against the background of a few goals. One is transparency and accountability, so that all decisions in the town planning system should be made in a way that is clear about who or what body has made the decision and why the decision has been made. Because too many of government's decisions have been mired in the notion that somebody knew somebody, or somebody was able to facilitate some particular benefit for somebody. A modern society cannot operate that way. You know, one of the things that we say in economics has to obtain in any public policy system is that public policy and public decisions have to be predictable. This is the only way in which the market will be able to make any decisions. It has to be predictable. People have to have a reasonable sense of the range of outcomes that can come from any particular action or activity. It cannot be completely arbitrary. Or you cannot be told, well, I don't know where this thing is because I don't know who's dealing with it, or I am not sure who made that decision. I am not sure whose signature that is on the file. We cannot operate as a modern Barbados in that way. So decisions in the town planning system must be made in a way that is clear about who or what body has made the decision. Goal 2 has to do with openness and inclusiveness, so that members of the public should be able to input into the decision-making process. Goal 3, that drives our approach to this planning law reform, efficiency and effectiveness. Decisions should be made in a timely manner, and prescribed timescales should be adhered to by all parties. It sounds simplistic to say, but simply, time is money. There's an opportunity cost associated with perhaps every activity. And so, the more you create uncertainty in people's lives, the more difficult their lives become, and the more costly to them. I read a paper some time ago that had as its premise, poverty is expensive. Poverty is expensive because it comes with a high degree of uncertainty. And so when your life is not certain, when you do not know what to expect, when you are made to wait for long periods of time, there is a cost to you. And so one of the things that we are looking to implement here, and not just here, but I would say across many of the services of government, is that we have to be able to prescribe by which time should you expect to hear a decision having been made on your matter, and if that time elapses and you have had no response, then what is the penalty? What is the repercussion? Goal 4, sir, speaks to the issue of sustainable development. Decisions should be guided by the principles of sustainable development, ensuring long-term environmental, economic, and community health and well-being. Sir, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change just last week produced a report that told us perhaps what we already knew, but they were able to confirm. We know that sea level rise and the attendant environmental issues are real concerns and critical issues for small island developing states like ours. But what that report said to us is that the 1.5 degrees of warming that was agreed under the Paris Agreement, that countries said, okay, we will try and contain it there. Even that means that we will see a further 70 to 90% decline in our coral reefs. Now, our coral reefs are one of the major assets that this country has. And so 1.5 degrees is difficult to do, to achieve. It's doable, but it's difficult. But even then, we are looking at up to 90 degrees, up to 90% degradation. If we get up to 2%, we are looking at 99% degradation in coral reefs. Barbados is so small as to be entirely coastal. We talk about coastal areas, but we are so small that even standing in the middle of the country, you stand to be affected by any severe activity on the coast. And further, from an economic perspective, any degradation our coastal area affects us all. These issues of climate change and resilience are survival issues for this country and for this economy. And we have to make sure that the principles of sustainable development are foremost in our mind as we go forward. Goal 5, sir, and I take the time to go through these because I want us to understand that this Barbados Labour Party government is purposeful in our approach to all things. And my grandmother used to say, start as you mean to go on. So that once you are clear on the principles that guide you and what you stand for and what you will do in the name of the people of Barbados, it makes things a lot easier. Goal 5 is to ensure, sir, that what we do and what we create is fit for purpose, so that all legislation, regulations, policies, and procedures should be fit for the purpose that they're being created. They should reflect the specific needs of Barbados as a small island state in the 21st century. And so that is why one of the principles that we have identified in addressing this planning law reform has to do with e-government. Because one of the ways in which Barbados needs to step out into the 21st century is to move beyond using technology for things that entertain us and use it for things that advance our development. And so we are moving more and more to having online processes for much of what people need to do. So the principles of e-government and improved platforms for sharing data, for giving people management information, for giving people access to information, to giving people the ability to do their business is one of the principles. Good governance is one of our principles in considering this planning law reform. Consultation and participation by getting everyone engaged. A culture of proactively managing development and not just waiting for things to fall down around us as happened over the last decade. These are all principles that have guided our approach to this planning law reform. And so, sir, I want to move now to some of the recommendations that are being made. And I will begin with the question of what is our approach, what is the model that we use, what is the governance model that underpins the planning legislation. Now, in the Commonwealth Caribbean, there's the ministerial model, which is what obtains in Barbados now, which is where the responsibility for administering the legislation is with the minister, and that there is, however, considerable delegation to the chief town planner. So the minister then has the power to determine certain classes of application, has the power to decide appeals. Now, it may be argued, as it is argued in this document, that the way this system operates is not very transparent, because we do not know on what basis that individual might be making decisions. And things that are increasingly discretionary are increasingly lack accountability. There is a second possible model, which is a statutory corporation model, where a statutory corporation is vested with the powers to administer the act. And this kind of model has perhaps higher levels of accountability, but it also has higher costs associated with it. The recommendation, sir, that is being made in the document, and one of the matters that was perhaps discussed at length as the document was considered by the public is that the model that we use in Barbados be a hybrid model, a hybrid of the two. And I want to explain what that is. The hybrid model would have, and this is for decision making on town planning matters, a statutory board. That board will be multidisciplinary. It would include representatives from regulatory authorities and the private sector, and it would be serviced by the Town and Country Planning Department office. So, as part of this model, appeals would be heard by a tribunal, and the minister would retain the power to determine certain classes of development. So this model perhaps is the balance of accountability and cost of the two previously described. So it seeks to have a more decentralized approach to decision making. And sir, I don't want to be naive or to appear naive in presenting perhaps another statutory body to make decisions. But I think that here is an opportunity, perhaps, to make sure that we apply the same principles of being fit for purpose and of being transparent and accountable, including financially so. I would say this is an opportunity to apply those same principles to how we constitute this statutory body, so that it is an opportunity to make sure that we have the relevant expertise, and that can be objectively decided. It can be decided that these are the types of skills, these are the types of perspectives that are necessary, and that this is the body that, based on these skills and experience, that we entrust with being able to administer the act, with the minister retaining some power to determine certain classes of development. And I want to make another thing clear. This is called a green paper because it is open for consultation, and because the consultants who are doing the work have been and continue to be accepting comments from all parties. And so the business in which we are engaged here today is to start to air, or to continue to air, I would say, because the document was online for some weeks until comments closed on the 5th of October. But it is an iterative process. And so we continue to get people's feedback on what is proposed herein. I will say that so far, based on the comments that have been received, that there is general support for most of the changes, and in particular, there is support for responsibility for routine decision making, support for what should be the role of the minister, and support for the hearing of appeals against decisions that have been made by town and country planning. So we have already received a considerable number of comments, and we'll continue to incorporate those as appropriate going forward. So the document proposes this hybrid model, but which would of course mean that there would need to be clear regulations developed in order to govern how it operates. I move now quickly, sir, to the question of regulation of land development. And I will not seek to go through every single category and every single recommendation. The document is in the public domain, but I will try to point out, or seek to point out, the types of things that I think my fellow honourable members and the people of Barbados through you, sir, would want to hear some discussion on. So, with respect to the regulation of land development, the purpose of the legislation is noted as to provide for the orderly and the progressive development of land. And so in that context, development is defined as carrying out of building, engineering, mining, or other operations, the making of material changes to the use of buildings or land, or the subdivision of land. And so within these categories, there are certain applications that are determined by the minister, and provisions exist for having a hearing. And this is one of the elements of the system that has prone perhaps to the longest delays. And again, this level and the sense of public trust in the process has perhaps been undermined by the notion that there is a lack of transparency in this approach. Further, Barbados has entered into and continues to maintain a commitment to certain undertakings made at the international level. One of those is to undertake environmental impact assessments on proposed activities that are likely to have an adverse effect on the environment. Now, even though we have made that international commitment, there's still no comprehensive legal framework that covers this. And so the document proposes that an environmental impact assessment regulation be prepared to clarify when an EIA is required, to clarify how it should be conducted, and how any mitigation measures that are proposed therein would be monitored. With respect to the regulation of land development, the further recommendation is made to clarify the ways in which the Coastal Zone Management Act and the Town and Country Planning Act interact. So, sir, like most of these types of operations in government, there is a need to consult different actors. But within that, it is sometimes not clear where one actor's responsibility and role ends and another's begins. So there are quite a few changes proposed in the Green Paper with respect to the regulation of land development. One of these is that applications referred to the Minister for decision should only be those that represent significant departures from the physical development plan, or those that are of strategic, economic, or environmental importance. So that rather than allocating matters to the minister based on the nature of the development, based on whether it is a subdivision of land and so on, that in the context of an agreed and approved physical development plan, only those applications that depart from that plan, or those applications that are of strategic, economic, and environmental importance should be referred to the minister. It would mean then that a qualified inspector would hold a hearing and would report to the minister on those applications, and that rules for the conduct of hearings and site visits should be clarified, and any report or decision should be made publicly available. The paper further suggests that strict timetables be adhered to for responding to these kinds of applications. Now, sir, I have lost count of the number of times or the number of reports that have been made to me about people who have come to Barbados with the wherewithal, with the interest, with the excitement about investing here. People who are locals or residents of Barbados, who similarly have had a business idea and have been ready to go forward and have put applications in. And because of the tremendous delays, have left and taken their capital and their ideas and their interests and their jobs with them. Now, growth and investment are the things that are going to get us out of this crisis. What we are doing now, with the measures that have been announced, is stopping the bleeding. If we want to ensure that we do not get back here, this country has to grow in a real way. And we cannot afford to let inaction stop not just the country from growing, but stop Barbadians from being able to benefit, to participate in that growth. Because we use the word growth, but sometimes we don't understand what it looks like and what it means for people. What it means is that if I come here to invest in the renewable energy sector, and I want to invest in biofuel, and I'm using some kind of grass to generate the energy, it means that people are planting the grass, it means that people are maintaining it, it means that people are employed in the plant. If I am bringing a hotel, it means that there's not only construction opportunities, but it means that there are opportunities for people to operate long-term in the sector. If I am Ross University and I'm coming here to set up, it means that there are employment opportunities for people to provide services to the faculty and students of the university. If I am a medical facility that is looking to come to Barbados, it means that the opportunities for growth and employment are far-reaching. I always say that investors do not come here simply as investors. They are whole people. They may bring their families, they may bring their children, they will buy a house or they will rent a house. They will need to have the grass cut. They will need to have somebody to come and put on some paint. They may need to have all kinds of services provided. But beyond that, sir, one of the other things, prompt commitments that we made as part of the manifesto is, yes, to be able to maintain opportunities for people in those sectors that I've just described, but also, and primarily, to be able to build a high-skilled knowledge economy. If there's one thing that Barbados has been able to demonstrate, it is its foundation in education. And I make the argument that perhaps our current education system needs, like so much more of what we're doing, to be further engineered to be fit for purpose and to be further engineered to be fit for this 21st century economy. But growth in this economy, sir, is not just about a number. It is about providing to people. It is about providing opportunity. It is about providing choice. And as I walk up and down the streets of St. Michael's South Central, one of the things that is clear to me is that ultimately what people want is opportunity. is that people want to feel like they are participating in something rather than being on the sidelines while a handful of people benefit from any economic activity, as there had been under the last administration. The change that we as a Barbados Labour Party government have to make in people's lives is that we have to reverse the consolidation of wealth that we saw over the last decade and make sure that the growth that we see in Barbados is inclusive and is led by the majority of Barbadians. So when I talk about growth and when I talk about this reform being important for growth, it is not just because of Bert. It is not just because we have set targets. Targets are important, yes, and they must be adhered to. But we have those targets for a reason. And we have those targets because the kind of Barbados that we want to create depends on the levels of growth and investment that we are able to realize. Sir, that brings me to another aspect of the Act, and it is one that I think provides a real opportunity for us. It has to do with what we call planning obligations. So the concept of planning obligations was first introduced to Barbados through an amendment to the Town and Country Planning Act of 2007. And in that amendment, it was limited to the provision of affordable housing, so that it meant that if you were seeking permission for a particular structure or application or development, that one of the obligations, or the obligation that you had to make, had to do with providing affordable housing in the area of the development. But in other jurisdictions, the notion of planning obligations is used to fund and to support a range of physical requirements, of social requirements, and of environmental requirements. And so it means that we have the scope, sir, to require certain developers to ensure, for example, that green spaces are created in and around the area that they're developing for the community to have access to. It means that we have the scope for other kinds of social or physical or environmental gains to be made. And perhaps I prefer to think of it in terms of planning gains, because it means that apart from the hard economic benefits that this investment brings with it, other types of benefit, in particular to the community around it. I think one of the things that distinguishes Barbados as a country, as a jurisdiction, is that we have a physically integrated society. I've been to other places where you feel the divisions and the distinctions in how certain categories of people live. In Barbados, we have the benefit, I feel, of living in a country where everybody, as my grandmother would say, live alongside one another. But perhaps one of the dangers, one of the things that creates resentment is the notion that people other than me are coming into my community and are able to enjoy benefits that I cannot enjoy, or that as a result of the benefits that they are reaping, that I am now deprived of certain rights. And so this is notion of planning obligations and broadening the scope introducing broader provisions for the planning obligations as the document recommends, is a tool for us to be able to better manage development in Barbados and better manage it so that we create spaces that speak to the whole person. We create spaces that reflect the Barbados in which we want to live. I think, sir, that another very regrettable outcome and really stain on our country and on our psyches of the last administration has simply to do with, I hesitate to say, the lack of development. On one hand, the lack of development of the country, of physical development, so that you really start to feel as if Barbados was frozen in time, or even a sense of arrested development, that nothing was happening, nothing was moving. But worse, we were not even able to maintain the status quo. Because the existing infrastructure, the existing roads and buildings, and the existing heritage sites, a lot of those buildings in Bridgetown, that as I walked through as a child, I would look around in wonder and think, what a beautiful place this is to live. And notwithstanding the dark history of our country, because I think it's something that more and more we will have to confront. But the fact is that I used to feel proud, certainly. I think most Barbadians felt proud to walk around and look around and see what is it, where is it that we live, and have a certain pride in the way that we comport ourselves and keep our surroundings. And you know, I, sir, grew up in a village, and everyone had their little plot of land. And most people had their little garden. My mother had a kitchen garden in the back, and she had a flower garden in the front. And every house, as you walk down St. Clair Road and Haggett Hall, as you walk down Bird Hill, as you go up Monroe Road and Pastor Road, similarly in Carrington Village, as you go through Arthur's Gap, as you go through Tweedside Road, every lot, as you go through Delamere Land, every little lot was kept in pristine condition. I always used to say that if it's one thing poor people knew how to be, it was neat and tidy. Well, we didn't have a choice, really, because you were judged if you weren't. But this sense of Barbadian pride, sir, that was reflected in how we kept our surroundings, and that was reflected in how the state also kept public spaces. That too, on top of everything else, has been completely abandoned in the lack of attention that has been given to public spaces and public infrastructure in this country. And so we have an opportunity here, sir, to start to restore the sense of Barbadian pride in how we live, in where we live, in what is around us, through some attention to planning obligations. So I want to go quickly to changes that are being suggested in the document with respect to limitation periods. And this one I think is important, because I think that we have to be accountable. We do have to be accountable. You know, sometimes I read documents that make reference to free healthcare in Barbados, free education and free healthcare. And I think, but it is not free. The things that we enjoy, that a government invests in, we have to take a decision to invest in it, but it is not free. And the burden that sits on the shoulders of myself and my honourable colleagues in this chamber is one of responsibility to Barbadians. Barbadians who have an expectation, not that things will be fixed overnight, but have an expectation that the people that they have elected will have a sense of accountability to them. And so I think that that accountability is important. And I think that being able to place some specificity on that accountability is the only way we are going to show what we are made of. I'm not afraid of accountability. And so the proposed changes with respect to limitation periods suggest a tiered system of time scales should be introduced. And those time scales are 8 weeks for simple applications and 13 weeks for more complex applications, and 16 weeks for applications that would require an environmental impact assessment. The document further suggests that strict timelines be adhered to from the date of receipt of the required information from the applicant. You know, I confess that I am not a planning expert, but to the extent that these decisions are crucial for investment, they are within the domain of the ministry in which I sit. And it means that from time to time I hear anecdotes about what people experience. And one of the recurring stories has had to do with the level of predictability of information required. So you asked me to submit these 2 pieces of paper, and I submit them, and you review them, and while I am waiting, expecting that within a certain amount of time, within 8 weeks, I will have a response. Within 8 weeks, I hear, oh, well, you know, you were supposed to send this. And it's not just in this domain that it happens. Again, that is a frustration. It is a frustration that costs people their sense of trust in the process, and is a frustration that quite simply costs people money. And so we have to have a sense of predictability on what people are expected to submit, what information is required from the applicant, and how the applicant is expected to fulfill whatever are the expectations of the Town and Country Planning Office. With respect to limitation periods, the document further suggests that consultations with referral agencies should be in accordance with existing strict timelines. So it means that if I have to go to Coastal to get their decision or to get their advice, that would be within whatever is the set timeline, so that I do not go to the applicant, or when the applicant calls, that I don't say, well, it is with Coastal, or it is with the Honourable Member for St. Peter, or it is with the Honourable Member for St. James South, because applicants feel a sense of powerlessness. You cannot operate. If we agree that economic development is about the provision of choice and agency, where agency has to do with feeling a sense of power and empowerment to control your own destiny, well, you can't feel as if your destiny is forever in the hands of other people. And I speak frankly to the matter because these are the issues that confront us. And so beyond the setting of time schedules, that there should be recourse to appeal to the board if the timelines are not met. And I stand in full support, in particular, of this part of the recommendations, because I think it is important to have concrete ways in which you are holding people accountable. We may differ and we may vary and we may discuss what those timelines are, but the fact that you have to be held accountable with benchmarks for how and what you deliver is one that I fully support. And I support it beyond this to other areas of government and the private sector business. Now, quite briefly, I want to move to two further matters outlined in the recommendations. One has to do with the enforcement, and the final area of the green paper on which I will focus has to do with the implementation. With respect to enforcement, the Chief Town Planner right now, under the Act, under the current Act, has considerable discretion to take action against anyone who's in breach of the planning legislation. So, in many ways, this process too lacks transparency, because the more discretionary a process is, the lower the level of transparency and accountability, because one cannot be sure on what basis a decision has been made. And so the Green Paper proposes the following. It proposes that the grounds on which an enforcement notice can be appealed to a judge in chambers should not be limited, as it currently is under the Act. It further recommends, and the proposed changes to which I make reference, sir, are not exhaustive, but I am highlighting the ones that I believe the House might want to air for further discussion, and that through you, the people of Barbados will want to have brought to their attention. It further suggests that enforcement and stop notices should be prepared and served by persons with adequate training in legal requirements and procedures, so that they understand the law, so that they understand the context, so that they understand their rights and their responsibilities in serving enforcement and stop notices. It recommends further that the Chief Town Planner should keep a publicly accessible register of enforcement action, which should be available online. Now, I am one who believes in the transparency of information. Not just because it's good governance, but because it is actually good economics. It is good sense, because the truth is that if you can demonstrate that you are acting fairly, then there can be no sense that you are not. It is quite simply the sensible thing to do. And the truth is, if you are acting fairly, well, you should have nothing to hide. And so, the recommendation to have a publicly accessible register of enforcement action, I think, is a sound one, because I think in particular that you want to have a sense that justice has been done. People want to be able to see that even where a decision is made against them, that they know and they understand, and that one set of rules were not applied to the member for St. Michael West, and another set of rules applied for the member for Christchurch East Central. Because really, one of the things I believe that has frustrated Barbadians over the last 10 years, and that we have seen emerge, is the idea and the fact of two Barbadoses. That one set of rules applies to people who operate in a certain space, or have certain friends, or have certain influence and power, and another set of rules applies to people with less influence and with less economic and social power. And so, in the interest of the equal application and equal treatment of all under the law, and to be able to show, by comparison, that a decision taken in May 2018 in Wotton and a decision taken under similar circumstances, in a similar context, in Carrington Village in June, can be shown to be the same. It is important to be able to show that. So, sir, finally, when it comes to implementation, I come to this part because I think it is important to highlight that these kinds of processes do not happen in a vacuum, and these kinds of processes require further investment of time and resources, so that the journey that we are on is one of legislative change. And once we agree to new legislation, once we have gone through the conversation, when the new legislation is in place, there will need to be detailed policy notes and orders and regulations, and a need to establish the new governance arrangements, because I don't want us to fool ourselves that the existence of legislation equates to its enforcement or to its good practice. We need to make sure that the actors, the people who will need to provide service and to administer the new act, not only understand what they're doing, but also feel empowered to act. And just like with much of what we're doing, it requires a strong desire for change. It requires the creation of a culture for change, and it requires, quite practically, a set of timelines. It requires a plan for how we will get there and what we are measuring ourselves against. So we have to set targets. We have to understand that we are implementing change not just in the legislation, but also in the process that guides us. So, sir, the paper before us and my presentation this morning has not been exhaustive. I want to encourage Barbadians, and through you, I encourage Barbadians to interact with the decisions that your government is making. Because the only way that we are going to cultivate real democracy is if Barbadians participate in the ongoing processes of change. I think one of the goods that we have to be able to deliver for people is the sense that they have the space to participate. So my presentation this morning, sir, has not been exhaustive. It has not covered all of the aspects of the suggested changes for law reform, but for planning law reform. But what I sought to do was to draw out some of what I think are the very important aspects of what we're trying to do, in particular, the spirit of what we are attempting to do. The fact that we have an imperative, we have a mandate to change the investment climate in this country. We have a mandate to signal, as we have been doing, I believe, to the region, to the international community, that Barbados is ready to get back on the path to what we were becoming. I think that we have in this legislation an opportunity to put our money where our mouth is, to be able to say to Barbadians, you can trust us to deliver. I believe that it is time, and it is timely, and it is important to turn the conversation to the growth that is required, but not just to the growth that is required, but to the opportunities that exist for Barbadians to participate in that growth. And that in so doing, that they will know that the government that they elected on May 24th is supporting their goals and ambitions according to all of the powers that government has. That we do not just consider our role, our responsibility, and our place to be tax and spend, to implement revenue measures and to make spending decisions, but it is to create the environment in which activity can take place. You know, I say all the time that government does not grow, the private sector grows. And the private sector, and when I say private sector, I mean writ large. I don't just mean big business. The private sector has to lead the way for growth and development in this country. But in doing so, we have to make sure that all Barbadians are at the table and are eating. So when we talk about private sector in Barbados, I am also talking about the man who wants to get a vendor's license and who has not been able to do so for 4 years for no good reason. I am talking about the young man in Flagstaff who fixes bicycles and who wants to be able, and has the wherewithal, who wants to be able to set up a shop on the side of his house, but wants to know that once he does so within the law, he will get a timely decision so that he can support his family. And so as I close, Mr. Speaker, I want to say to Barbadians that this Barbados Labour Party government, yes, is about making sure that we accomplish recovery of our economy, because we have to. There is no basis to go forward without it. But beyond that, this Barbados Labour Party government is concerned and has put and will continue to put all of its energy into the real engines of growth in this country. The education of its people, the well-being of its people, and creating the kind of environment that people can trust and people know that once they have engaged the government of Barbados to offer assistance or to provide a service, that we take seriously that commitment and that obligation, and that we will deliver to them. And with those few words, sir, I thank you. I move, sir, that the resolution.
Honourable Mr. Michael West.
Mr. Speaker, thank you. I think, Mr. Speaker, this matter brought by the Honourable Member